Feria is pay to win. Like Hearthstone is pay to win, like Magic is pay to win. Or at least that's what several players would have you believe. But is this actually true? My name is Moonfasa, and today I'd like to answer that question for you. I have over 2,000 hours of playtime in Feria, so I've seen it all. The rise and fall of Feria's free-to-play model, the broken release of the Oversky expansion, and the growing pains Feria has had to endure in a unique and innovative genre. This video is only going to talk about the expansion DLCs involved in modern Feria. There may be other disagreeable issues with the game, but that's a discussion for another time. As it stands today in 2023, Feria uses a completely buy-to-play model. After you purchase the base game for 25 Canadian dollars, there are still 3 expansion DLCs for $12.50 that give you extra cards to play with. These extra cards cannot be obtained without purchasing them, unless you play in Feria's draft format or you use cards with random generation effects like Spell Whirl. For this reason, many players like to etch the words pay to win in the sand with their pitchforks, since these cards aren't a part of the base game. And I'm not really here to talk about how you define a pay to win experience, but rather explain what is actually required to win in this game. Because release Oversky aside, that expansion was horribly broken back in the day, modern Feria is balanced in such a way that you only require the base game to win your matches, whether that be casually or at the highest competitive level. But you don't believe me, do you? Because that could easily be answered with a quick Google search. Well, I thought you might say something like that, so I didn't prepare this video without proof. I want to tell you a little story to back up the claims of my own and a majority of Feria's community to put this argument to rest once and for all. This is the story of how I became the #1 Feria player without using any DLCs. It actually all started in August of 2020 when Feria released on the Nintendo Switch. I had won an extra copy of the game from some lunch party thing, and I thought it would be a cool use of that new account to create a Let's Play series geared toward beginner players. If you haven't played Feria before, you start your game with a very limited selection of cards in your collection. In fact, you only have access to the cards you see on screen here. If you do a couple bonus tutorial missions, you'll get rewarded with these cards you see here. But the rest of Feria's card pool is up to the player to collect over time through booster packs and crafting. Thankfully, the game doesn't ever allow you to open more than 3 copies of a card, so unlike other booster pack models from other card games, you can earn a full card collection super quick. Aside from this series helping beginner players with what cards are good to craft near the start of your game, I also thought this would prove to be a fun little challenge for myself and see how far up the ranked ladder I could climb with these cards and whatever else I happened to pull from booster packs. Little did I know how intense this journey was about to get and just how strong base set cards actually are. It started off fairly easy, as you might guess. I've been playing this game for a long time, and all new players will have to start at the same rank 25. If I want to advance a rank, I have to earn a certain number of stars by winning my matches. In Feria's ranking system though, these are more like the qualifying ranks, because after you succeed past rank 1, you become what's called a God rank. And in God rank, you'll be given an actual placement based on your ELO score, and show how you compare to all the other players in the world. So this was the goal, get to God rank. We didn't encounter very many troubles for a long while actually. I suspect the game might have had some bias in how it matched me with my opponents based on my low hours of playtime on that account, so we were undefeated when we got to a very particular match in rank 3 against the player Hawkmoth. Now at this point in my climb, about 9.5 hours in, I started to realize that I was very close to God rank already, and how cool would it be to make it there with an absolute flawless win streak. So the pressure was really building in this match, but we had a pretty great start, swarming the board with 4 Battletoads against our opponent's Rush deck. So I wasn't feeling too worried. That is until my opponent got an insanely lucky Hellfire, randomly killing all 3 of my collecting toads, leaving only the one toad that was stuck in the middle of nowhere. And to make matters worse, my next top decks were a second Humbling Vision, which wouldn't do anything for me, a second Wave Crash Colossus, a third Wave Crash Colossus, and then a third Humbling on top of all of that. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Feria strategies, I'll break down why this is so devastating to see in this very pinnacle game to get me to God rank. As my opponent is rushing me, he's applying a lot of early game pressure, and if I don't have creatures to push him back in these early moments of the game, I'm just gonna die. And the cards I've drawn here are the Humbling, which is not a creature, and the Wave Crash Colossus, which is an incredibly expensive card. The idea with this card is that anytime you harvest from an enemy well, you discount its cost, eventually becoming a very cheap 4 cost. The only problem is that all my Battletoads died during this turn, so I don't have easy ways to harvest from this top well and defend my face all at the same time. But I wasn't about to give up. I had a potential achievement on the line that nobody in Feria's history had ever accomplished. So it was finally time I started to earn my keep, using some very big brain strategies, and the fact that my opponent was playing a pretty non-competitive deck, I would say. I managed to weasel my way out of the hole I was in and finally close out a win. Oh, okay. Still have my win streak, but that was a close one. I'm gonna have to really focus through the next 2 ranks if I want to get to God. It was around this time also that Twitch chat too became aware that I was close to a flawless God ranking, so I started getting stream sniped. And if you've watched me on Twitch before, I do actually allow this on my streams. I really don't mind stream sniping, as long as you don't try to hard counter me and you turn off the stream during our match. But it was clear then that chat was not going to let me have this so easy. I was gonna have to work for it. So there were a couple other close calls during this whole climb, but ultimately I pushed through those matches and made it to my final star without dropping a single game, and this was my placement into God rank.
Rank 1! Rank number 1 with the beginner card collection. How about that?
And there you have it! Not only is it possible to become the best on Feria's ranked ladder without using any DLCs, but you can make it there with the piddly scraps of cards Abraham feeds you at the start of your Feria journey. Now obviously I've had a lot of experience in this game, so a brand new player will not be able to do this, but at least now you have proof that skill goes so much further in this game than the actual cards do, and base set cards are just really strong. Oh, wait, what's that? Why are you still commenting? No, this was supposed to be your proof. It's right here. What do you mean Feria's ranked ladder isn't competitive anymore and doesn't count? Fine. Okay, yes, the Feria ranked ladder isn't as competitive as it once used to be. Most players here are either new to the game or have gotten bored without updates, so they just play casual silly decks. And I was going to leave it here and make this video 2 years ago when I had finished this previous series, but I realized the haters would still have some fuel in the tank. If I really want to prove my point, I'm going to have to enter a competitive tournament and win it all, because even after several years of Feria drought without any new content, tournaments are still a really competitive space. And if I can win it there, nobody is going to be able to say Feria is pay to win. So from that day forward, I started training. I scoured the hub for old deck lists that succeeded before the existence of DLCs. I researched the best of the best from ye olden times, climbed to the top of Mount Everest using only my pinky finger, did 1,000 push-ups every day, watched the entire Twilight series. It was a gruesome tale, so I'll spare you the details. I've grown old and grisly now. If I don't win this tournament, it will all have been for nothing. But honestly, it wasn't that hard to find decent deck lists to construct a tournament lineup with. Base set cards, like I said, are just really good. And speaking of a lineup, if you're unaware of how tournaments work, we actually need to construct 4 different decks. And there's a whole strategy with how you pick decks and cards that cover your other deck's weaknesses, and consider which deck you're going to ban from your opponent during the banning phase, which deck you want to start with, but check out my video in the top right corner if you want to learn more on this. 2 of these lists were designed by the player Super Blizzards, an active member in the Feria community. One of these lists was apparently designed by Cappuccino, a player who is no longer with the community but made big waves back in Feria's golden era. And the last list is a more or less standard green Beastmaster deck, but I've made some pretty specific design choices to help it balance out my lineup. Now I went into the Aurora Open number 1 thinking this lineup was pretty solid, but I came out even more impressed with its performance. These decks do a great job at covering each other's weaknesses, and they're all just really strong in their own individual ways. The red list carried me through the first round and the semifinals all on its own with a 2-0 and 3-0 sweep respectively. This deck, though unconventional as a bargain list, is very strong with its mid-range pacing and value combos of bold bargainers into Hellfires and Red Devils. It does also help getting one of the 2 farm boys in the list in my starting hand 3 games in a row. Sorry, Summerflame. The one potential mystery series was in the round of 8 against Happy Joe, who brought a full lineup of Magnus covers, a legendary creature that needs to either be one-shot or transformed to stop its insane value. And I had none of those answers in my decks. So I lost the first match of mono blue versus my mono green, which was expected since this is an unfavored matchup for me. But then Happy Joe disconnected and couldn't get his internet connection working again, so I ended up taking the win by proxy. Kind of a cheated win, unfortunately, and I was quite curious how the rest of the series would go, but it is what it is. I think my lineup would have done just fine had we continued, as I still had my yellow list, which was already looking strong into all 3 of his remaining decks. Speaking of yellow, this monstrosity list here is arguably the strongest in the meta right now, and many current players already know this, but what you may be unaware of is that this doesn't use any DLC cards. The core strategy revolves around using efficient high-attack flying creatures paired with the aggressive summoning range of Mistral Guide. We also have some Shaitan monstrosities to combo with our high-attack creatures should we require an OTK win condition. And this is the deck I led with into the finals of this tournament. My opponent led with a mono red list, which is a minor weakness to this archetype, but still very winnable. I did not, however, win this matchup. Not because of my weakness per se, but I just didn't pilot it very well, and that was my bad. Not a big deal though, I countered back with my mono green Beastmaster, and oh boy did this list slap. I beat back the very favorable green versus red matchup, even with a big oopsie on my part, and then proceeded to sweep the rest of the series, even playing into the unfavorable Istanu and yellow monstrosity deck lists. There are some big glaring weaknesses to the mono green archetype, but when you can chain Beastmaster and Oakling buffs into the right positions on the board, this suddenly becomes a very tricky match to pilot for the opponent. And so with that, I took the first place crown for this open, and further proved that you do not need DLCs to be good at this game. Just kidding, there's more, because I wasn't about to just stop here. I wanted to make it utterly undeniable to all the haters out there that you can absolutely win competitively with just the base set. So I set out for the biggest competitive event in Feria, the Seasonal Cup. There are 4 seasonal cups throughout the year that require a certain number of Feria World Circuit points to participate in. These can be gained by placing in opens or simply by placing on the ranked ladder. And I'll spare you most of the details since we already ran through one tournament. If you do want to check this out or any of the other games I mentioned, I'll leave links down in the description. But surprise, surprise, this tournament was won with the very same lineup, finishing the last match with another Beastmaster versus Yellow Monstrosity matchup. It was a very tense mid-game with Monstrosity stats building and building on my opponent's side and me dumping bigger and bigger stats with some taunts to protect my face from the eventual 20+ attack Monstrosity. On one crucial turn though, my opponent invested just a little bit too much into the Monstrosity, and I was able to counter with my Voice of Truth, deleting all of those hard-earned stats and leaving the board presence majorly in my favor. And that is where I'll end this story because there are no more ways to prove my point here. Winning a seasonal cup and open and placing number 1 on Feria's ranked ladder without the use of any DLCs. If anyone says Feria is pay to win now, you can just send them this video and be on your way. I will quickly mention the strengths of DLCs though. This whole video I've kind of been downplaying the importance of these expansion sets because I think pay to win is just such a familiar taste on card gamers' mouths that it's hard to look the other way when there are paid DLCs available for purchase. But the 3 expansion sets that are currently out are still very worth picking up if you enjoy the game. Most competitive decks will actually run DLC cards because they provide more options for deck building, which means you can make more unique lineups for countering more specific niches. But the core of almost any competitive deck is almost always going to be made up of base set cards. I think the devs did a really great job with how they balanced all of these cards so that the base set is the strongest of them all, and the DLCs provide a fun and still very competitive parallel to these fantastic cards. I hope you enjoyed this little journey into Feria's competitive scene, and if you are newer to the game, I hope this has removed any discouragement you might have felt when facing against DLC cards on the ranked ladder. It's not about the money you spend, but the skills you learn. This is a very complicated game to master, so it can be really tough to see this at first, but hey, that's what I'm here for. If you do want to hone your skills in Feria, you might want to check out some of the links on screen. Beginner guides, advanced, whatever your skill level, I've got it all here for you. So until next time, and happy gaming.